Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to dig into something pretty wild, a modern trade dispute that, believe it or not, was kicked off by a 30-year-old speech from Ronald Reagan. We're going to explore how his words are now at the center of a huge fight over tariffs, presidential power, and yeah, the price you pay for just about everything.
Okay, so this is the quote right at the heart of it all. It's from Ronald Reagan back in 1987, and he's warning about demagogues ready to declare a trade war. He was talking about protectionism, the idea of building economic walls with tariffs. So the big question is, how on earth did this warning from decades ago become the flashpoint for a new conflict with one of America's closest friends?
And what's just wild is that this exact quote, used in a Canadian TV ad, is what triggered the whole thing. It prompted an immediate and very sharp response from Washington. And this didn't just stay a word of words either. It escalated, fast, leading to a new 10% tariff on some Canadian goods and a total breakdown in trade talks.
All right, so this whole thing brings us to our first big question. And it's really a fight over history, over a legacy. What did Ronald Reagan actually believe about trade? And who really gets to claim they're following in his footsteps? Well, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board really kicked things off, accusing the current administration of, and I'm quoting here, taking Reagan's trade beliefs in vain. And that just sparked this massive debate. Does the current strategy of using tariffs honor Reagan's legacy, or does it totally betray his entire economic philosophy?
And this, right here, this really gets to the core of the whole argument. Reagan's philosophy was free but fair. For him, open markets were the starting point, the default. Sure, he might use a tariff, but it was like a surgical strike, a rare, targeted move against a specific country for a specific reason, kind of like he did with Japanese motorcycles in the 80s. The approach now is, well, it's different. It uses broad tariffs, even against allies like Canada, not as a last resort, but as the first tool to try and force what's being called a hard reset of the whole relationship.
So here's the bottom line. Yeah, he wasn't against all enforcement, but his main message time and time again was all about openness. You look at the record, and he was constantly warning that big sweeping tariffs would just spark a cycle of retaliation that would end up hurting everybody. For him, prosperity came from competition and lower barriers, not higher walls.
But this isn't just some academic debate about history. It's also a huge debate about power. And that brings us to our next section. Who actually has the right to impose these tariffs in the first place? And the answer? Well, it's in a bit of a legal gray area.
And this is where things get, well, a little messy. See, the Constitution is super clear. Congress is supposed to set tariffs. That's their job. So how can a president just go and do it alone? Well, it turns out that over the years, Congress has kind of handed off some of that power, creating a loophole for emergencies. And that loophole has a name, IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It was created way back in the 70s to let the president respond to real foreign threats, like freezing the assets of a hostile nation. But now it's being used to justify these broad tariffs on our allies, which is sparking this legal showdown over whether that's what those emergency powers were ever meant for.
This really lays out that constitutional tug-of-war, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got Congress, which is supposed to be in charge of long-term economic policy. On the other, the president, who has these emergency powers for immediate threats. So the huge question at the center of it all is this. Is using IEEPA for tariffs on an ally a real emergency? Or is it just a backdoor way to set economic policy without ever going through Congress?
Okay, so we've talked history, we've talked law. Let's get down to brass tacks. What does all this actually mean for you, for your wallet? How do these tariffs really affect the prices you pay every day?
So, the number we're hearing is 10%, a 10% extra tariff. But here's the thing you have to understand. That 10% isn't just a bill that Canada pays. It starts a chain reaction, and the cost travels all the way through our economy. So who ends up paying for it?
See, a tariff isn't a bill you send to another country. It's a tax that gets paid right here at home. And it's a journey. It starts with a U.S. company, an importer, paying that tax at the border. Then, that extra cost gets baked into the price they charge manufacturers. Those manufacturers then pass that cost on to retailers. So by the time a product finally hits the shelf, that initial tax has been passed all the way down to the final consumer. And that means you. That means families and businesses.
And this is exactly why tariffs with Canada are such a huge deal. The US and Canadian economies aren't just trading, we're literally building things together. Just look at the auto industry. A single car part might cross the border back and forth multiple times before it ends up in a finished car.
A tariff is like a tax that gets added on again and again and again at each crossing, just driving up the price of the final product.
And of course, moves like this don't happen in a vacuum, right? A tariff imposed by one country almost always leads to the one thing you can always count on: retaliation.
It's the classic tit-for-tat, a textbook trade war. The U.S. hits Canadian lumber, Canada turns around and hits, say, American oranges. And these retaliatory tariffs aren't random. Oh no, they are strategically chosen to cause the most political pain, often targeting key industries in the home states of powerful politicians.
So, we've got history, law, economics. It's a lot of moving parts. So how do you make sense of what's coming next in this whole dispute? And I think it's really important to get this straight. The debate here isn't about whether to defend U.S. industries. Both sides of this argument want to protect American jobs. The real fight is about the best way to do it. Is a big, broad tariff the right tool, or does it end up causing a lot more harm than good? So if you want to know how this is all going to shake out, here are the 3 big things you need to be watching. First, the official tariff lists. That'll tell us exactly which products are getting hit. Second, watch for Canada's official response. What are their counter tariffs going to be? And finally, keep an eye on those legal challenges. How the courts rule on this could change the game for presidential power on trade for a long time to come.
So think about it. We started this whole thing with a quote from Reagan, and here we are tangled up in a debate about the Constitution and the price of your groceries. At the end of the day, it all boils down to this one fundamental question. Are tariffs a smart tool for making trade fair, or are they just a blunt instrument that ends up being a tax on everyone? The answer to that is going to define America's economy and its relationship with its closest allies for years to come.